Morning, folks. Nice to be with you. So several parts of the world are represented here. Is anyone from Indistan? No one's from Indistan. Well, then you're not going to know these guys. It was 6 men of Indistan, to learning much inclined, who went to see the elephant, though all of them were blind, that each by observation might satisfy his mind. The first approached the elephant, and happening to fall against his broad and sturdy side, at once began to bawl, "God bless me, but the elephant is very like a wall." The second, feeling of the tusk, cried, "Ho, what have we here? So very round and smooth and sharp, to me 'tis mighty clear. This wonder of an elephant is very like a spear." The third approached the animal, and happening to take the squirming trunk within his hands, thus boldly up and spake, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a snake." The fourth reached out an eager hand and felt about the knee. "What most this wondrous beast is like is mighty plain," quoth he. "'Tis clear enough the elephant is very like a tree." The fifth, who chanced to touch the ear, said, "In the blindest man can tell what this resembles most. Deny the fact who can. This marvel of an elephant is very like a fan." The sixth no sooner had begun about the beast to grope, than seizing on the swinging tail that fell within his scope, "I see," quoth he, "the elephant is very like a rope." And so these men of Indistan disputed loud and long, each in his own opinion, exceeding stiff and strong, though each was partly in the right, and all were in the wrong. So oft in theologic wars the disputants, I ween, rail on in utter ignorance of what each other mean, and prate about the elephant not one of them has seen. And my friends, I fear we're prone to much the same tendency in epidemiology. And the case I'll make this morning is that there is a luminous prize, tantalizingly within reach of all of us. But if we are to grasp it, apply it to ourselves, those we love, patients, clients, communities, we will first have to get past the disassembled parts and see the elephant in the room. So that's where we begin, with the elephant in the room. We'll then move on and talk about the peril, the promise, and the problem. We will come inevitably to a fork in the road. We'll see if we can get traction with the right metaphor. I'll make a case for professional sandbagging. We will have recourse to a big spoon, particularly apt in this part of the country. We will return to a fork in the road, and ideally at the end, for having seen the forest through the trees, we'll get out of the dark wood. We begin, however, in a dark wood, in the dark wood of modern epidemiology, where the case could be made that chronic diseases kill lots of people, kill us prematurely, and because they're chronic diseases, they don't just take years from our lives. Before ever they do that, they take life from our years. And these are the usual suspects. The list is populated by heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia, and in fact, historically, when we talk about the leading causes of death in the United States, or the leading causes of premature death in the United States, or for that matter, much of the world, this list would be the answer. Heart disease number 1, cancer number 2, stroke number 3, respiratory disease number 4, diabetes number 5. So it is. So it has been. For the foreseeable future, so it shall be. But that there is a different way of looking at this altogether. And our eyes were first and perhaps best opened to it in 1993, when Bill Foege and Mike McGinnis published a seminal paper in the Journal of the American Medical Association, shown on my slide, and entitled "Actual Causes of Death in the United States." What McGinnis and Foege recognized should perhaps have been obvious to all of us all along. Diseases aren't causes. Diseases are effects. And what we really want to know is effects of what? What caused the diseases that in turn caused the premature death? You know what winds up on death certificates? It's stuff guys like me, while we're residents, young, working 120 hours a week, really sleepy, right down at 3 o'clock in the morning when a nurse calls us to the bedside to pronounce somebody dead. What'd they have? Well, they had a heart attack a couple of days ago. Okay, heart disease, I'm going back to bed. It's not a very erudite process. McGinnis and Foege are more erudite. They said that's just not good enough. We want to know what caused the heart disease, that caused the heart attack, that caused the death. We want to know about the stuff we can change. So they got their arms around the national data, wrestled them under control, and reached the conclusion that all of the premature deaths in our country every year, but for a rounding error, were attributable to a list of 10 factors. And the beauty of McGinnis and Feege's list is that everything on it is modifiable. Most of what's on it is modifiable by each of us. Those items that are not are modifiable by all of us. Sometimes the best defense of the human body resides with the body politic. Sometimes the only way to change what needs changing is to come together and act collectively. But much of the action was in our own individual hands. And in fact, as interesting as the full list might be, we can focus this morning on just the first 3 things, because 80% of the action was there. 80% of the premature deaths in the United States each year around 1990 were attributable to the first 3 things on McGinnis and Feege's list, and they were tobacco, poor diet, lack of physical activity, or as I like to call them, bad use of our feet, our forks, and our fingers. 80% of the premature deaths occurring each year in our country. Now, this is pretty provocative information. The only trouble with it is it's an old vintage. You probably like your data fresher than this. Well, we've got fresher data. 10 years later, Ali Mokdad and others at the CDC reanalyzed this issue, reaching substantially the same conclusion. All that had really changed in the span of a decade is that the gap between tobacco as the #1 cause of premature death and chronic misery, and the combination of bad use of feet and forks as #2 had narrowed. It had narrowed for one good reason: we smoke less, and one bad reason: deteriorating use of our feet, degenerating use of our forks, worsening epidemics of obesity and diabetes to show for it. This then was the dark wood in 2000. That's also getting to be an old vintage. We can get fresher data. 2009, the work of Earl Ford and colleagues, published in the Archives of Internal Medicine. And this represented the results of survey research conducted among 23,000 adults who happened to be living in and around Potsdam, Germany. Dr. Ford and colleagues asked these 23,000 people about 4 factors affecting their health. They asked them, do you smoke, yes or no? Do you eat well, yes or no? And folks, we're going to have to pause here for just a second, and I will let you know that this portion of the program is sponsored by Lumosity, because before I'm done, I will show you a picture of a house on fire, and I will say, do you remember? And what I will want you to remember is 2 things. First, Dr. Earl Ford. Second, vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. They asked 23,000 people, do you eat well? And the marker for eating well that they used was habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. And here's the thing, folks, and I'll return to this before I'm done. It was enough. It was enough. It was enough to differentiate eating well from eating badly. Enough in what way? Well, I'll tell you in just a second. But for now, trust me, it was enough. They didn't dive into the weeds of which particular fatty acid is more important than which other. They didn't talk about GMO or gluten or debate whether or not my diet could beat your diet. Habitual intake of vegetables, fruits, and whole grains meant good. Its opposite, not so good, and it was enough. And we'll return to that with the house on fire a bit later on. For now, back to our regularly scheduled program. So they asked, do you smoke, yes or no? Do you have a good diet, yes or no? Defined accordingly. Are you physically active on a regular basis, yes or no? And is your weight in a healthy place, yes or no? And I digress again momentarily to note that one of these things is not quite like the others. One of these things arguably just doesn't belong. Weight is not a behavior. And this is a really important consideration in the insurance industry as we think more and more about incentivizing healthy behaviors, trying to reduce risk for chronic disease by motivating people to do the right thing. Did anybody in the room wake up and decide what to weigh today? Doesn't tend to happen, right? The portion of weight that we control is controlled by 2 things already on Dr. Ford's list: diet and physical activity, calories in and calories out. To the extent that that doesn't define our weight, And it doesn't, because two people can eat the same, exercise the same, one gets fat, one stays thin, and that's just not fair. But whoever said life would be fair? Unpleasant stuff can happen to thin people too. That's not always fair either, right? There are non-volitional factors involved. Ethnic heritage, genetic polymorphisms, variations in the microbiome. Weight is not a choice. Weight is not a decision. Weight is not a behavior. Weight is an outcome. Nonetheless, it was on Dr. Ford's list. So returning then to the study, they asked, do you smoke, yes or no? Do you eat well, yes or no? Are you active, yes or no? Is your weight where it should be, yes or no? And what they went on to do was compare the two ends of the spectrum. So they compared, I don't smoke, I eat well, I'm active, my weight's fine, to I smoke, eat badly, don't exercise, my weight's a bit out of control. These people, over the span of their lifetimes, this was a retrospective cohort study, had an 80% lesser rate of all major chronic disease than these people. Flip the switch from bad to good on any one of these four factors, and the lifetime probability of all major chronic disease went down about 50%. But fire on all four cylinders, and the lifetime probability of heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia collectively was slashed an astonishing 80%. Imagine if the news were to break tomorrow, front page above the crease of whatever you used to read before you got an iPad. There's a new drug available, FDA approved, available in bountiful supply, stunningly inexpensive, shockingly free of side effects, safe enough for children and octogenarians alike, and taken once daily for the rest of your life, will slash your risk of all major chronic disease by 80%. Who would you call first? Your doc to get a prescription, or your broker to buy stock in the company selling the stuff? Both would be an excellent idea, but for the fact that there is no such pill. And in my professional opinion, there never will be any such pill. But lifestyle is exactly that medicine. And we've known about it, if not since Hippocrates, at least since 1993. Anyway, if you happen not to like Potsdam for some reason or prefer your data fresher, reaffirmation of these findings yet again a couple of years ago by Kavavic et al. In a study in the UK, more recently still by McCullough et al. In a study here in the US. And frankly, the beat just goes on with study after study after study essentially saying exactly the same thing, a repetitive drumbeat in the peer-reviewed literature spanning decades saying, get a few aspects of lifestyle right, and as compared to what we see in the world around us, your personal risk of all major chronic disease will be 80% less. And the beat of this drum reverberates to our very pith and marrow, to within the double helix of DNA. As some of you may know, in its early stages, prostate cancer may not need treatment. It's amenable to what's called watchful waiting. In the study on my slide, my friend Dean Ornish and colleagues enrolled 30 men with early-stage prostate cancer amenable to watchful waiting and thought, well, we can do a bit better than just watch and wait. While we're doing that, let's give these men the benefit of lifestyle as medicine. Let's give them an optimal plant-based diet. Let's give them routine physical activity, obviously no tobacco, and in addition, plenty of good sleep, stress mitigation, strong social connections. As I like to call these things, feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. That is the six-cylinder engine of lifestyle as medicine. Get those six right. After that, everything is vanishingly less important. Well, they got those six right, and over a span of months, they studied not so much the men, and not so much the cancer in the men, but preferentially the genes in the men with the cancer. And what they found is that the lifestyle intervention took 500 cancer promoter genes and turned them off, dramatically downregulated their expression. 50 cancer suppressor genes and dramatically upregulated their expression. The power of lifestyle is such that it can refashion our fate at the very level of our DNA. We went into the genomic age thinking that DNA was destiny, with great hope about finding ways in laboratories to tweak our genes. Never happened. We exited the genomic age and went directly into the epigenetic age, recognizing that what we do and how we do it influences what our genes do and how they do it. DNA, for the most part, with rare exception, is not destiny. To a vastly greater extent, largely neglected in our culture, dinner his destiny. And this is not just one study, this is a whole branch of the literature that's filling up fast. So I think the case can be made, and indeed dare hope the case has just been made, that the master levers of medical destiny are not the tools of the medical trade. Nothing I was taught to carry through the corridors of hospitals. Nothing at the cutting edge of biomedical research advance, not PET or SPECT or fMRI or robotic surgery. The master levers of medical destiny were in our hands all along. They are what we choose to do each day with our feet, our forks, and our fingers. And I trust you know what Archimedes said about a lever. Give me one long enough, I can move the whole world. Make no mistake, these levers are long enough and should long since have served to move the whole world of modern epidemiology and public health to a better place. But, alas, we like to say knowledge is power. Would that it were so. The gap between what we know, individually, collectively, and what we do with what we know, belies that wishful thinking. So, my friends, as we convene here this morning, there is a collective mission that looms ahead of us all. The arduous miles of translation, for a luminous opportunity to do nothing less than advance the human condition, has been lost in translation all these years. We have failed to translate what we know perfectly well into what we do routinely. That task falls to us, and we must fulfill the mission, for the stakes of the status quo, which I suspect many of you deal with all the time, are quite simply too high. There are many ways to characterize that toll. One good one is a sequence of maps from the CDC showing trends in obesity. On these maps, color change is bad. It indicates a rising prevalence of obesity. This was 1985. This is 1995. This is 2010. This is 2013. Folks, we'll either get a handle on this problem before or after Crayola runs out of colors for the CDC to make new maps. And the reason to talk about obesity for someone like me, a public health physician, is not because we all care what we see when we look in the mirror. I suspect we do, and I think that's fine. But this runs a whole lot deeper than that. Obesity is a canary in the coal mine of chronic disease. Where there is more obesity, there is more dementia. There is more arthritis. There is more stroke. There is more cancer. There is more cardiovascular disease. And most indelibly, there is more diabetes. So the trends in diabetes from 1994 to 2010 are in lockstep with the trends in obesity. And though we've been in the frying pan for quite some time, most signs indicate we're quickly headed toward the fire. A few years back, the CDC projected that should current trends persist, by or about the middle of this century, 1 in 3 Americans will be diabetic. Now, we have about 27 million diagnosed diabetics in the U.S. today. 1 in 3 people would be about 100 million. Kind of hard to imagine paying that bill. We'll return to that issue in a minute. We do have data since that projection that we are, in fact, on track to hit that target, unfortunately. We have evidence that the mortality toll of obesity is higher than ever we realized. Why might that be? Well, because old people tend to die and young people don't. And the old people dying today did not grow up in a world of epidemic obesity. It only found them later in life. But kids born closer to the present and young adults born closer to the present were born into a world of epidemic obesity. It affected a greater portion of their lifespan. And what this very sophisticated study found was that as we look at birth cohorts getting ever closer to the present, the mortality toll of obesity is rising because people are spending more of their lives awash in the epidemic. We have evidence that the rates of diabetes are not just rising briskly, but rising particularly briskly in young people. And oops-a-daisy, turns out it won't be 1 in 3 of us who's diabetic by mid-century. It'll be 40% of us, and in ethnic minorities, maybe 50%. So instead of 27 million diabetics in the U.S., we'll have 127 million diabetics in the U.S. And folks, I don't think it's a stretch to say there's just no way to pay that bill. We're struggling with healthcare costs right now. You all deal with that. Can you imagine when 40% of the population has a chronic, costly, potentially disabling disease beginning at every younger age? How will we deal with that economically? The simple answer is we will not. I submit to you that should this come to pass on our watch, the United States of America will be insolvent. I submit to you that though we signed up for different missions, both you and I alike, we find ourselves conjoined on nothing less than the front lines of homeland security. The fate of the nation hangs in the balance with what we do over the next little while with regard to a few of the great challenges of our time. Climate, perhaps, chronic disease, certainly. And although the economic toll of this is almost unfathomable, it isn't really what preoccupies me. I didn't go into public health because I was so preoccupied with money. It's the human cost of this that keeps me awake at night. 40% of the population diabetic in 2050. 40% of the adults in 2050 diabetic. Folks, that's not us. Our day will have come. Our day will have gone. We will have bequeathed this blighted future to our children and, in some cases, grandchildren. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about stunting the future for the people we love most in the world, should this come to pass. Talk about kicking the can down the road. And therefore, quite simply, irrefutably, this cannot come to pass. Whatever is required to change our trajectory simply must happen. And with regard to our kids, the writing is already indelibly on the wall. It used to be stunning that a kid would get adult onset diabetes, now called type 2. It no longer is. It used to be stunning that young people would have risk factors for cardiovascular disease. It no longer is. But we have even seen a 35% increase in the rate of stroke among children ages 5 to 14 in the United States, even as the rate of stroke has declined in those 50 and older due to better detection and treatment of hypertension. And the only smoking gun on the scene to account for this is epidemic childhood obesity. Can you imagine anything more unconscionable than a stroke in an 11-year-old that a societal commitment to better use of feet and forks could have prevented? Oh, sure, we wring our hands about epidemic childhood obesity and diabetes, but we just keep blithely running on Dunkin' and marketing multicolored marshmallows as part of a complete breakfast all at the same time. So here we are. And I apologize. Sort of a gloomy start to a talk, right? Kind of a lugubrious beginning to the day. Well, good news. You know what they say. It's always darkest just before the dawn. Let's let a little light shine on these proceedings. If this is the dark wood, or if these are the dark clouds above the wood, what then of the silver lining? Well, I'm pleased to say there is one, and it's every bit as luminous as the clouds are dark. What if lifestyle were our medicine, and routinely accessible as such? What if knowledge were power? What if we went the miles of translation and got the job done? Well, then I could say to you, we could reliably eliminate 80% of all of the heart disease in the world. These are not contentious assertions. We could eliminate 90% of all diabetes. Just think about that. Instead of going from 27 million diabetics to 127 million diabetics, we could cut 90% of the 27 million. That's an unbelievable difference in the fate of our families and the fate of our nation. We could eliminate up to 60% of all cancer and similar benefits across all of the other chronic diseases that are the scourges of modern times. I could say this to you, and I could cite peer-reviewed studies to back me up. And in fact, you know what? I am saying this to you. I am citing peer-reviewed studies to back me up, so I would like to know whether or not this slide has brought a tear to any eye in the room. Or a lump to any throat, perhaps? Tearless, lumpless, insensitive bastards. Well, that may be too harsh. I bet you're perfectly nice people. Maybe the problem lies with my slide. See, these are stunning statistics, arguably among the most stunning in the history of public health and certifiably true. But at the end of the day, of course, they are still just statistics. They're dull, they're dry, they're bland, and they are notoriously anonymous. They're about the public. And I've been in public health long enough to know that the whole enterprise is encumbered by potentially crippling fiction. For you see, there is no public. The public is nameless. The public is faceless. The public is impossible to love. There is no public. There's just you and me and everybody else. And when we think that way, I think it can change everything. But I need your help to do it. So we're all involved in the healthcare industry one way or another, but let's not be. Forget about what you do professionally. We're people first. Let's just celebrate that common bond of humanity and think about the indelible bond we have to those we love. Think about that network and then play along. If someone you love has been touched by heart disease, would you please raise your hand and keep it in the air? If someone you love has been touched by cancer, please add your hand to those in the air. If someone you love has been touched by diabetes and you don't have a hand up, please add your hand. If someone you love has had a stroke and you haven't raised a hand, please raise your hand, and folks, look around the room. Don't be lazy. Keep your hands up now. Look around the room. Everybody? Everybody. I'll be your proxy now. Everybody. I just listed 4 major chronic diseases: heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes. I didn't even add dementia to the list. And these 4 scourges of modern times have invaded all of our homes and all of our families. So now conjure to your mind's eye the face of that person who made you raise your hand and remember that day. The phone call, the email, the text message. Maybe you rode an ambulance. Maybe you were right there on the scene. Maybe you were far away and were getting updates throughout the day. Maybe you made a trip to the ER, maybe the ICU, maybe the CCU. Maybe they got better and came home. Maybe they did not. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't. But either which way was a lousy day. And for many of us, we're thinking about more than one person and more than one lousy day. And here's the thing. If knowledge were power, if we said enough, failing to put what we know to good use, enough. If lifestyle were readily accessible medicine to us all in our culture, 8 out of 10 of us in this room would not have had cause to raise our hands. Those bad days wouldn't have happened. That's what an 80% reduction in all chronic disease feels like. It's not remote, it's not statistically anonymous, and it's not about them. It's about you and me and the people we love. When we part the veil of statistical anonymity, the faces we see looking back at us are the faces of people we know and the faces of people we love. It is for ourselves and them that the promise of all this must be kept. It is for us and them that the miles of translation, however arduous, must at last be traversed. And frankly, I think this begs the question. If we have the knowledge, and we all quite literally have skin in the game, the skin of people we love, what could be forestalling our progress for so long? What's the problem? What's in the way? And frankly, I think something rather fundamental is in the way. In essence, if you take this and you add this, you're pretty much likely to wind up with this. In much the same way as if you took this and added this, you would get this. And I give you my figurative trademark for the better part of 25 years now, the polar bear in the Sahara. I hasten to note that when my wife and I first put this slide together, there was no threat of this actually happening to polar bears, and that may have changed, unfortunately. But Danny, you'll have to get Al Gore here to talk to the troops about that. My mission is different. My point is that there's something quite obviously wrong with this picture. Polar bears are marvels of survival, beautifully adapted to one of the Earth's harshest climates, but adapted to only that climate and environment. And the very traits and tendencies that keep them alive in the cold of the Arctic would, of course, conspire against them under the burning Sahara sun in summer. And my point here is that we are polar bears in the Sahara. Throughout most of human history, calories were relatively scarce and hard to get, and physical activity was unavoidable. It did not require gym membership or specialized footwear. It was called survival, and everybody did it every day. We have devised a modern world where physical activity is scarce and hard to get, and calories are unavoidable. Houston, we have a problem. and Minneapolis and every place in between, I submit to you that as a species, Homo sapiens has no native defenses against caloric excess or the lure of the couch, never having needed them before. No native defenses, that is, save one. Great big Homo sapien brains. We are arguably smarter than the average bear and can think our way out of this mess of our own devising, and that's exactly what I'm proposing we do. But we have two challenges to confront. The first is, if we can all agree that we know exactly where there is, it may not be easy to get there from here. I think we can, though. After all, we put our footprints on the moon, right? We put footprints on the moon for three reasons. We wanted to go, we're an incredibly ingenious species, and we knew where to find it. Right? But I think it depended on all three. If we hadn't agreed where to find the moon, if there had been many competing theories about which was the actual moon, we'd still be bickering. There'd be no footprints up there. There are footprints up there. There is an American flag up there. That's what we're capable of. So I think it'll be hard to get there from here, but by golly, I think we can do it if we can agree where there is, and that's the second problem. Is it clear where there is? Well, with regard to fingers, not smoking is good, smoking is bad. Anybody at all confused about that one? That's pretty straightforward. Feet, using them good, sitting on our asses all day long, not so good. Anybody confused about that one? Now, the fitness experts will debate the best way to be active and how much, and resistance training versus aerobic and all that, but those are the weeds. For the most part, we all know that motion is good, right? Nobody's terribly confused here. What about forks? There's the rub. If we were to take a poll in this room, it would be interesting to see how many different theories we have about a healthy way to eat. And of course, you're getting the information from these guys who change their minds every 20 seconds, right? Tune in tomorrow to GMA or the Today Show to hear about the pickle juice diet or some other innovation, because everything you heard up until today is rubbish. Those guys are morons. So we come to a fork in the road. Along one time, we remain perennially befuddled about the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens. We do nothing to get there from here. We just keep bickering about where there is. I don't like that. I propose a different time. I say we acknowledge that we are not clueless about the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens and get the job done. And I'd like to think that I speak with particular authority on this topic. I have authored 3 editions of a textbook on nutrition for healthcare professionals called Nutrition in Clinical Practice, the most recent of which came out last fall, about 750 pages, 10,000 scientific citations. Has anybody in here ever written a textbook? You have? Painful as hell, right? I mean, I'm sure your advice, like mine to everybody else, is don't ever do it. It's like going to jail, right? It's horrible. So the book isn't horrible. The book, I think, is quite good, but writing a textbook is really quite horrible. Anyway, I did it, and it's a bird's eye view of the nutrition literature. I was also asked by Annual Reviews in Public Health to write a paper entitled, Can We Say What Diet is Best for Health? And they asked me to review the literature without bias and reach a conclusion. And so I have a bird's eye view, but there are other eyes on the same prize, other colleagues who've weighed in looking from altitude without a diet to sell. In particular, Frank Hugh at the Harvard School of Public Health, who just completed his term on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. He and colleagues wrote this paper, Prevention and Management of Type 2 Diabetes, Dietary Components and Nutritional Strategies. Dr. Hugh and I reached such similar conclusions in these 2 completely independent projects that we came together and wrote a piece on the Huffington Post, which I commend to you, called Knowing What to Eat, Refusing to Swallow It. So if you put my name or Dr. Hugh's name or that title into Google, you'll pull it right up. And what I'm about to tell you is not because I am blissfully ignorant of the controversies. Quite the contrary. I know that in the modern age, the opinions we get about diet are generally the result of a blogger who read another blogger's blog about a blogger's blog. And absolutely nobody in that sequence read the original study or has a clue about nutritional epidemiology. My job is to read the actual study, and I can tell you that most of what we know about nutrition has been egregiously misrepresented in hyperbolic headlines. No, you should not be slathering butter all over your body. You certainly should not be putting it in your coffee. No, saturated fat is not good for us. No, low carb doesn't beat low fat, and for that matter, low fat doesn't really beat low carb either. It's all a bunch of hooey. So when you look from altitude at all of the relevant literature, there are arguments for and against low-fat diets, arguments mostly for good vegan diets, arguments for low glycemic diets, arguments for the dietary approaches to stop hypertension or DASH diet, arguments for the diabetes prevention program, arguments for the paleo diet done right. I think a lot of people fly the paleo flag as an excuse to eat pastrami. Folks, there was no Stone Age pastrami, right? You know those folks. Hey, I'm paleo, and you see them, bacon cheeseburger. Wait a minute, no bacon, no hamburger, and no cheese in the Stone Age, right? I mean, where is your antelope fillet, right? So, the people who do this right eat a wide variety of wild plant foods and game. They eat venison or antelope, and yeah, frankly, that diet looks pretty good, but very few people are doing it. Low carb, different ways to get there from here. I like the work of Dr. David Jenkins, the Eco-Atkins approach, low carb, high protein, but plant-based. Good results with that. The Mediterranean diet. Very rich literature, and it's a beautiful thing because I suspect most of us would happily travel to that part of the world to spend our hard-earned money to enjoy the food. It just so happens it's one of the world's healthiest cuisines. Yay. The Twinkie diet, probably not so much. But anyway, all these other diets that are really worthy of consideration, if you review them without bias and aren't trying to sell anybody a diet, it turns out that what really matters here is not what makes them different. That's what populates the fad diet books. That's what populates the morning shows. I know, I worked on air for Good Morning America for 2.5 years. I did this gig. What makes them work, what makes them good, is what makes these diets alike, not different. It's the olive in the middle. And Michael Pollan pretty much nailed that. Food, not too much, mostly plants. That's the truth about all of the good diets that sustainably result not just in losing weight, but finding health. It's that simple. Now, admittedly, it's a bit vague and it leaves a lot to the imagination. I think that's a good thing because what it establishes for us all is the basic theme of feeding Homo sapiens well. It does not specify the exact variant on the theme that is the prescriptive best because we don't know. Imagine the research it would take to know. We'd have to randomly assign pregnant women to be paleo or vegan so that their fetuses were exposed to those different nutrient profiles in utero. Then those babies would have to be breastfed by those mothers adhering to the diet. And then as soon as the baby started to eat food, they would have to adhere to those different diets for 100 years to see which group does the best. Study would cost $1 billion, take 100 years to do. It's nuts. Never going to happen. So do we know whether an optimal Mediterranean diet is better or worse for human health than an optimal vegan diet? We don't. That's the beauty of it. Pick the one you like. Just stay on the theme. That's all we really need to do. And this basically was the conclusion in this year's Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. And if you have an opportunity to weigh in and tell the political process, keep your big mitts off of this scientific report, please do. Beautiful work. It basically says eat a variety of wholesome foods in a combination that works for you and your family, and you just can't go too far wrong. Emphasize vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, and seeds. Everything else in lesser quantities, you'll be fine. They're exactly right. Michael Pollan said it in 7 words. These guys said it in 572 pages, but this is government work. Question is, are we eating mostly plants? Well, as they say in the part of the world I come from, forget about it. 1.5% of Americans meet the daily recommendation for both vegetables and fruits. This despite the fact that orange juice qualifies as a fruit and both French fries and the ketchup poured over them qualify independently as vegetables. 1.5%, it's been fixed there for decades. No, we're not eating food, mostly plants. We're eating this garbage. This is an image from a book called Hungry Planet, What the World Eats, and every image in the book is a family in a particular culture and their food for a week. This is the US of A. And, if you've got good eyesight, you'll spot the grapes and tomatoes, but everything else here comes in a bag, box, bottle, jar, can, and most of it looks like it would glow in the dark if these folks would turn out the lights. Friends, if it glows in the dark, step away from the box and nobody will get hurt. Right? I mean, maybe that advice would work better than Michael Pollan. So this is where we're stuck. And so it really returns us to what should be the challenge, and that is getting there from here. We know where there is. We know with regard to lifestyle in general. We even know with regard to diet. And all of our collective effort, passion, resources should be directed at the difficult but possible task of getting there from here. And to take on that task, I invoke a metaphor which helps me and maybe will help all of you. The metaphor is a levee. I like the levee metaphor for a number of reasons. First, what we're up against may be likened to a flood of highly processed, hyper-palatable, energy-dense, nutrient-dilute, glow-in-the-dark, bet you can't eat just one kind of foods. By the way, regarding those foods, are you familiar with the work of Michael Moss? Let me commend, there's a hand in the back, all right, but most of you know. Michael Moss is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist, wrote a great book called Salt, Sugar, Fat. But if you Google this title, or Moss, and just Google Moss and addictive, you'll pull up a New York Times Magazine cover story entitled The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. Great read. Basically what Moss tells us is when they said, bet you can't eat just one, it was a threat, and they were loaded for bear. They had done their homework. Most of the big food companies have whole teams of PhDs using functional MRI scans whose job it is to design formulas we cannot stop eating. They literally use the best available science to maximize the calories it takes for us to feel full. So when I talk about hyper-palatable food, that's what I'm referring to. So we're up against a flood of that stuff. We're up against wave after wave of technological advance that gives us gadgets and gizmos that do everything muscles used to do. And as Jared Diamond said, in the modern age, invention is the mother of necessity. Got to have that new stuff, right? I was privileged to attend an Apple event, and their CEO, Tim Cook, was announcing all of the upgrades. This was a few months ago. And I had just left my Mac in the hotel room a few minutes before, and I loved it. It's a great computer. And then I heard Tim Cook describe the new version of the Mac, and I thought, my computer sucks. Got to get the new one. Got to have it. So invention is the mother of necessity. And then there's a constant flow of marketing dollars encouraging us and our kids to eat all the very foods and use all the very technology that propagate obesity and chronic disease. So we're up against a flood. I propose the remedy is a levee, which can contain the floodwaters. I also like the levee metaphor because it breaks down the task. It's too big. It's overwhelming for me. I'm sure it's overwhelming for you. But all you really need to do any given day to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem is stack a sandbag. No one of us is going to fix all this. We're not going to fix it in one fell swoop. But every little thing we do can be part of a comprehensive solution. And finally, I like the levee metaphor because it dishes out a precautionary tale. We are a quick fix, silver bullet, active ingredient kind of society. Everybody really wants to tune into the show of my friend Mehmet Oz and find out about the one thing that will fix it all. Of course, Mehmet's much less likely to say that these days after he was scolded, so he's being a bit more cautious. But back in the good old days, you could tune in every day and hear about the one thing, right? But the idea that there is just one thing is rather naive. It's like putting down one sandbag and thinking maybe this one will stop the flood, and of course the answer is it won't. And then thinking, well, that must have been a defective sandbag. Let's tune in tomorrow and find a different one. But that's all nonsense. It's a great big problem. We need a great big solution, an aggregation of doing all the right things in all the right places for all the people all of the time. And when our countermeasures rise to the level of the floodwaters, on that day and not before, the ground at our feet will dry out and a world of possibility will open up. For that reason, then, I am a professional sandbagger. This is what I do. Unashamed to declare it, I manufacture, test, stack, and as appropriate, attempt to disseminate sandbags. So although here today I am philosophical, epidemiological, and even a bit poetical, you'll find me most of the time with my sleeves rolled up and schmutz under my fingernails trying to fix what's broken. And here are a few examples of sandbags. We know that kids get too little physical activity these days. We know that schools have a hard time fitting in phys ed or recess. We re-engineered phys ed. We designed a program called ABC for Fitness, Activity Burst in the Classroom. I should digress for just a second to note that Catherine and I have 5 children. We have 4 daughters and a son. Catherine actually talked us out of retirement to try one last time and see if I could produce a Y chromosome, which it turns out I can under circumstances I'm not prepared to discuss. But in any event, we wound up with a little guy who bounced off walls when he was a little guy. My son Gabriel's now about 6'2" and 16 years old, but when he was 5, he was just uncontainable. And at that point, people were starting to talk about hyperactivity. I said, no, he's a healthy kid. I was like that when I was a kid. I just spent a lot more time being active. We actually built this program because of our son. It's now in hundreds, if not thousands, of schools. It doles out discrete bursts of physical activity as short as 3 minutes at a time, under the control of a classroom teacher right in the classroom. And over the course of the day, when the kids are unteachable, you do physical activity bursts that were put together by experts in both physical education and pedagogy. You can teach during the activity bursts, and every kid in every elementary school can get 30 minutes of physical activity every day. And you can increase your teaching time rather than decrease it, because the time you're converting to physical activity was the time you previously spent saying, sit still, keep your hands to yourself, don't throw that, don't pull that, don't even think about it, wake up, pay attention, that time. And every teacher will tell you, yeah, we got a bounty of that time every day. Now, this sounds like a good idea, I'm sure, but I'm a scientist. We try not to fall in love with our hypotheses. We have faith, but we get the data. We did a randomized intervention in 1,000 kids. Half got ABC for fitness, half got business as usual. In the half who got ABC, significant improvements in key measures of fitness, stable performance on all standardized tests, markedly improved behavior in the classroom, fewer kids got into trouble. For your purposes, thinking about insurance, significant reduction in all medication use, significant reduction in medication use for asthma, and oh yes, a 33% reduction in medication use for ADHD. We take naturally rambunctious kids, send them to school, bolt them to chairs all day long so they can grow up to become adults. We can't get off couches with crowbars, and if they gripe about it along the way, we medicate them. The proper remedy for rambunctiousness in children is recess, damn it, not Ritalin. This program is free. Help yourselves. It's a sandbag in the levee. We have a sandbag on the nutrition side as well, another free program. It's a 90-minute DVD available in English and Spanish. It teaches food label literacy. This is in countries all around the world, reaching millions of kids. And the Nutrition Detectives program eventually distills down at the end of the 90 minutes to 5 clues that fit on a refrigerator magnet. For instance, Michael Pollan says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants, but you're shopping for breakfast cereal. Does that help you? Can you tell which box of stuff is more food, mostly plants, than which other? It's kind of a difficult translation, right? How about this? The shorter the ingredient list, the better. The clues are like that. They're punchy, they're memorable, they're actionable. So there are 5 of those. Kids get those on a refrigerator magnet, take it home to mom and dad. 90 minutes out of a whole school year. The program is free, the DVD is free. We give this stuff out through my nonprofit foundation. Sounds like a good idea again. Does it work? We did an intervention in 1,200 kids this time. Half got Nutrition Detectives, half got business as usual. The half who got Nutrition Detectives, significant improvement in their ability to identify and choose more nutritious foods and interpret food labels correctly. Not really surprising, though. We taught kids in school and they learned. That's what's supposed to happen. Duh. Here's the beauty of it. The parents of the kids who got Nutrition Detectives had a significant improvement in their food label literacy. We never even talked to the parents. We just infected their offspring with knowledge and sent the little vectors home. They did the rest. But the other thing that told us was that the parents had exactly the same knowledge deficit and the need to learn this stuff as the kids. So get this DVD and watch it yourself. It's fun. You'll see me flying in an animated plane. We have all these nice special effects. My plane loses its wings, and it's fun. Anyway, if you've got kids, get a copy of the DVD, show the kids. If you know teachers, please pay it forward. Sandbag in the levee. We're reaching out to middle school kids with a music video program called Unjunk Yourself. We have 3 music videos on YouTube. We'll be producing our next one soon. And as the name suggests, we want to encourage kids to unjunk themselves. They're being manipulated by big food. They're being taught that multicolored marshmallows are part of a complete breakfast. Yeah, the lousy part. Again, we can do much better than that. We want to stir up a little bit of righteous indignation with these music videos. And our latest one is I'm an Animal. So if you Google Unjunk Yourself, I'm an Animal, you'll pull this right up. And our front man is my formerly hyperactive son, Gabriel, who, as I said, is grown up now. And it was very handy that he had this lion as a friend to appear in this video. So check out I'm an Animal. It's on YouTube. And anybody in here cook occasionally, make meals at home? Then maybe you'll love my wife's recipe website, also freely accessible. Many people ask me, what do you eat? And, since you know a fair amount about nutrition, what do you do? this is what I do. Catherine, who by the way has a PhD in neuroscience from Princeton, so she's a research scientist, but she also grew up in southern France, so endowed with the blessings of the Mediterranean French cuisine, unbelievably good cook and a great scientist who experimented with recipes to satisfy my nutrition standards. She has cooked for me and our 5 kids all these years, and the food is fabulous. And one fine day, we had the idea that we should just pay it forward. So she developed this beautiful recipe site, Cuisinicity.com, and all of the Katz family recipes are there. Help yourselves. Okay? If you like to cook, and these are recipes made not by a professional chef, but by a busy working mom with 5 kids. So they're economical, they're convenient, the ingredients are not esoteric. And the tagline here is, love the food that loves you back. I don't believe we should have to choose between good food and good health. I think when we get the formula right, we get good health from good food. We can love the food and we can love the pleasures of vitality. They go together. That's how my family does it. I'd love to share that with your families. Help yourselves to Cuisinicity. It's a place where you can literally have your cake and eat it too. And this is an example of the recipe innovations that Catherine uses. So this cake is every bit as decadent as it looks, and yet the secret ingredient is black beluga lentils. Believe it or not, your dessert can be a concentrated dose of satiating fiber and nutrients and even protein. It's delicious. Give it a try. My signature contribution to the levy is a nutrient profiling system to help people identify more nutritious food at a glance. My colleagues and I, when we built this thing, called it the Anki, the Overall Nutritional Quality Index algorithm, but it saw daylight as NuVal. It was intended as GPS for nutrition. We studied it extensively to prove that it worked, but the most important study came out of the Harvard School of Public Health, where they showed that the higher the average NuVal scores, this scores food on a scale from 1 to 100, the higher the number, the more nutritious the food based on all of its nutrient properties. The higher the average NuVal scores of people's foods, the lower their rate of premature death and chronic disease. We can improve our diets and our health one well-informed choice at a time, and although this study in 100,000 people was pretty impressive, it's still just statistics, and we've already talked about those, so let's put a face to this. Meet Sally Galvin, wife and mother of 2. She's like many others. She shops in a Hy-Vee supermarket in Kansas that has the NuVal system. The scores go on the shelf tag next to the price, and over 18 months, Sally lost 115 pounds. Remember what I told you about Michael Moss's work, The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food? Food industry engineers food to maximize the calories it takes to feel full. Well, empowered with the ability to identify the more nutritious option in every food category, you can reverse engineer that. Buy better bread, better cereal, better yogurt, better pasta sauce, better salad dressing. You can take gram after gram after gram of sugar and saturated fat out of your daily diet. You can take those calories out. But by simplifying your foods, choosing items with shorter ingredient lists or higher NuVal scores, you can fill up on fewer calories. The goal to healthy weight is not going hungry all the time. It's choosing wholesome foods that fill us up on the appropriate number of calories. Michael Moss characterizes the problem. I've devoted much of my career to engineering the solution. NuVal's in about 2,000 supermarkets around the country, reaching about 40 million shoppers. It was in Meijer in this part of the country. I don't know if it still is or not. Those things come and go. I don't know if it's in other supermarkets. Coburn's, perhaps, is nearby. But in any event, may or may not be in a supermarket near you. And we've always got new sandbags on the assembly line back at the shop. But of course, you and I and the people we love can't just keep waiting on the world to change. These big projects in public health really are about changing the world. What about doing something immediate? Well, I thought, I know how to do it. I'm supposed to. After all, I'm a board-certified specialist in preventive medicine and president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. If I don't know how to live a healthy lifestyle in spite of it all, who would? So I know. And I practice what I preach, and I find it quite manageable, and that doesn't make me a swell guy. It just means I'm an expert. I know what I'm supposed to know, just like a pilot may or may not be a swell guy, but knows how to fly a plane, right? You can learn a set of skills and then practice them. Well, I thought everybody can learn these skills. We all learned how to ride a bike and use the alphabet and drive a car, and pilots learn how to fly planes, and this is a skill set. So I wrote a book, and I put down all of my skills in it and described them and said, here's how I do what I do. Dozens and dozens of examples of here's how I make good food choices, here's how I fit physical activity in, here's how I address the things that are most fundamental to lifestyle medicine. So this is my latest book. It's called Disease Proof, and what it's really about is skill power. We lean a bit too hard, I think, on willpower. And yes, you need that. You have to want to be healthy. But wanting it without knowing how just makes it a frustrating enterprise. Knowing how is all about having skills. It's my job to have those skills, and it's my privilege to share those skills. So if you think that may be of use to you or someone you know, check out Disease Proof. We're also working to help professionals get in the game. So we developed a sandbag for physicians in particular, but other healthcare professionals, to make them better at lifestyle counseling. We called the program OUCH, Online Weight Management Counseling for Healthcare Professionals. It really ought to be OLCH, Online Lifestyle Counseling, but OUCH is easier to say. And then we can goof around and say this won't hurt a bit. And this is based on 15 years of behavior modification research in my lab, and it's all freely available online, and for any physician colleagues in the room, 4 hours of Category 1 CME credit for free, authorized by Yale University. 4 brief modules about effective, efficient, streamlined behavioral counseling in the primary care setting, and 4 hours of Category 1 CME credit. Writing down this URL might be a bit of a chore, so just Google OUCH program and you should pull it right up. Help yourselves to this as well. And as president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, it is my task to try and improve lifestyle counseling, to do better lifestyle in medicine. But frankly, my vision, I like to think, is bigger than that. I think what we really want is for lifestyle to be the medicine readily accessible all around us, so that, frankly, everybody just needs a whole lot less medicine. And so we come to it then. This is the proposition. Lifestyle is the best medicine we know, unquestionably. We need a spoon to help the medicine go down. Now, Lord knows the last thing we need these days is more spoons full of sugar. We've got too many of those. But we need a spoon. And since it's a big job, I think we need a big spoon, kind of like this one. And the argument could be made that lifestyle is the medicine and culture is the spoon. And this argument has been made beautifully by my friend Dan Buettner, whose name many of you will know. Dan is the author of The Blue Zones, a National Geographic Fellow, who's played a pivotal role in characterizing those populations around the world that live the longest and the best. So far, they've been identified in 5 places. I bet they'll find more. And the 5 places are Ikaria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, Loma Linda, California, and the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. These are the populations around the world with the highest concentration of centenarians, people who live to be 100. They don't just live to be 100. They don't get chronic disease. They stay sharp, they stay vital, they don't get dementia, and yes, eventually they do die, but more often than not, they go to sleep one night at the end of a long, vital life and just don't wake up. They check out peacefully and go gentle into that good night. Boy, that's the way to do it. They live long, they prosper, and they go in peace. It's a beautiful thing. These are the blue zones. And what they rely on in the blue zones is lifestyle as medicine. They don't smoke. They eat diets of real food, mostly plants. They're physically active. They get enough sleep. They're not stressed out. Strong sense of community and social connections. Feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. Dan may describe it a little differently than that, but basically that's the formula. And what's beautiful about the blue zones is they not only validate the incredible health-promoting effects of that basic formula, but they remind us that the formula is a theme and not a prescription, because in Okinawa, Japan, it's a traditional Asian diet, very low fat, a little bit of fish and seafood, lots of rice, lots of vegetables. In Costa Rica, it's a decidedly omnivorous diet with a strong emphasis on a particular kind of tuber that grows there. In Ikaria, Greece, and Sardinia, Italy, it's a very high-fat Mediterranean diet that includes some meat and fish and seafood. And in Loma Linda, California, it's a vegetarian diet, if not a vegan diet. Quite different, and yet variations on the same theme. They all work beautifully. We could use what we know and put this to better use here. And that then, my friends, is my dream at this stage of my career. I want to do something about this. And so the Glimmer of Hope is a project originally called Glimmer, a global lifestyle medicine movement to effect a revolution. Although this name is changing now that we have a PR firm, and it will be called the True Health Initiative. But either way, we want to help light the world's way to better health. So this is the landing page for now. We'll be updating the website very soon. And the vision is, we have this beautiful blue planet, let's keep it that way and make the whole darn thing a blue zone. If we can do it anywhere, why not do it everywhere? We know how. One of the strategies would be better lifestyle in medicine, and that means better training of medical students, other healthcare professionals, faculty development, CME programming, and you are involved. It means better reimbursement for lifestyle counseling. We have to prove that it works, but we have to support it so that professionals get paid to do it. And then we need cultural supports so that it sticks and makes a bigger difference. But the part that excites me more than lifestyle in medicine is lifestyle as medicine. And as some of you may know, Dan Buettner has partnered with Healthways to create the Blue Zones Project, where they go into sites that are ready and try to help them become blue zones, like Fort Worth, Texas, and the state of Iowa, and other places all around the country. They're trying to affect culture change. And I think it's a great idea and a beautiful thing, although I do think there is a problem. You go into, say, Iowa, and you try to help people eat well and be active, but all the while, Iowa is part of the bigger culture of the United States, and they are hearing every day, just like us, America runs on Dunkin'. Don't worry about it. Multicolored marshmallows fortified with 11 essential vitamins and minerals. Part of a complete breakfast. Don't worry about it. All right? All-you-can-eat buffet. Don't worry about it. Soda makes you happy. You can skip away the calories. Don't worry about it. So all the while they're working to change the culture in one location, the mighty wind of the macro culture is blowing against their efforts. And I think we can fix that with the True Health Coalition. A global assembly of the world's leading experts, changing the perspective in our culture. And so we come to the Lumosity test, and I told you I would say to you all, do you remember? And the answers would be, Dr. Earl Ford, very good. And vegetables, fruits, pretty much getting the message. Good job, right? Dr. Earl Ford's study in Potsdam, vegetables, fruits, and whole grains. Folks, we have known since McGinnis and Fege 22 years ago. We have known since Earl Ford, the better part of 10 years ago, the simple things that could help eliminate 80% of all chronic disease, and yet we sanction every day the sale of new fad diet books, the nonsense on the morning shows about tune in for the next magical diet, learn how to lose 34 pounds in 17 minutes. We do it again and again and again. We sign up for lotions and potions and pixie dust, and we bicker. The scientists bicker about which diet is best. My diet can beat your diet. The paleos hate the vegans hate the paleos. They both hate the Mediterraneans. Everybody's diet is best. Nobody's talking to anybody. It's as if the House of Public Health were on fire, and we, the firefighters, have our back to the blaze, and we're arguing over who's got the right hose or water. Well, you can't possibly put out a fire with that hose. It's the wrong caliber. You've got an 8-centimeter hose. Everybody knows for this kind of fire you need a 9-centimeter hose. Well, listen, bozo, you're one to talk. You're using hard water. Everybody knows it's far better to put out a fire with soft water, and meanwhile, with our backs to it, the building burns to the ground and we don't spray a drop. Preposterous, right? The House of Public Health has been on fire for our entire lifetimes. As we've witnessed the rise in obesity and chronic disease, we have known for decades how to put out the fire, and we have not done nearly enough. So it is enough bickering, enough fractious discord. All we need to do is rally around the fundamental truths. Imagine a day in the United States where you can't sell the next fad diet book, just like you can't sell one in Ikaria, Greece, because everybody eats the way everybody eats. We all know the fundamental truths about healthy nutrition. We don't need a new book to tell us. Been there, done that. Let's put out the fire. I don't think any one voice, however reasonable, however voluminous, can get there anymore. Used to be possible in the days of C. Everett Koch, in the days of Benjamin Spock. One voice in health and medicine could rise above the din, but that was before the internet. Koch did not have to deal with the blogosphere. There's so much noise, it's impossible to be heard. So I took a lesson from another doctor, a colleague of mine, Dr. Seuss. You're all familiar with Horton Hears a Who? So you know that the Whos on their dust bag were going to be boiled in bezelnut oil. We are in no risk from bezelnut oil, by the way. Partially hydrogenated oil is another story, but They were going to be boiled in hazelnut oil because nobody could hear them except Horton. And you know how they saved themselves. They banded together. Every last who added their voice to the same chorus, and what they said was, "We are here." Well, what if we did the same thing among the leadership, the world's leadership in health and medicine, nutrition, lifestyle, prevention, public health? Not to say we are here, but to say we agree. All these differences you hear about are people trying to sell you stuff, but actually the world's leading experts all agree about the fundamentals of healthy eating and the rest of healthy living. Well, we built that. It's called the True Health Initiative. The Council of Directors is already over 225 people from 26 countries, including 3 former U.S. Surgeons General, deans of nutrition schools, chairs of nutrition departments, leaders in public health, luminaries in the culinary field, like Alice Waters, Sam Cass, who was the White House chef until a few months ago, and many others of that caliber. And there are leading vegans on the panel: Dean Ornish, Cal Esselstyn, T. Colin Campbell, Joel Furman, Neil Barnard, all on the panel. Leaders of the paleo movement, Mel Konner, Boyd Eaton, Lauren Cordain, they're all on the same panel saying, actually, yes, we agree much more than we disagree. The public just never hears about the agreement because it doesn't sell books or time on the TV. But we agree. So we have built that. And what we're thinking is Dan Buettner and Healthways and other projects like that, they can send in the ship and crew to try and change culture. But what we can do is change the direction of the mighty wind, change the messages in our culture at large, so that we understand we are not clueless about the basic care and feeding of Homo sapiens. The challenge remains to get there from here, but we know exactly where there is, just like the moon. And we are ingenious people, and once we have clear marching orders, we can get the job done. And if I'm making sense to any of you, I invite you to join us. Google Glimmer Initiative and sign up. Add your voice to the True Health Coalition. We want to be a global force for change, and what this is really about is putting out the fire, using what we know. It will be lovely to watch new Nobel Prize issued in medicine for the advances that can fix the things we don't yet know how to fix, but that's the residual 20%. What we already know is enough to address 80%. And so here we are at the end and come again to a fork in the road. For far too long, health in our culture has been allowed to languish on the road less traveled. But of course, as you all know, the road we travel into the future is entirely up to us. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood, and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth, then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay, in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day. But knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. 2 roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Friends, my conviction is it could make all the difference in the world to travel down a different road into the future, to give our children and grandchildren the future they deserve. But me being on that road won't get it done. In unity, there is strength. I hope some of you will join me there, because I do believe that together we can make all the difference in the world. Thank you all very much. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. Also happy to have breakfast. Yes?
Hi. One item I did not hear you mention was allergies. And I kind of wonder how allergies fit into this, because there are situations where one has allergies, they need to be able to take certain medications or not be able to eat certain foods or something like that. How do you factor allergies in?
So the big story about allergies, the fascinating backstory, is nicely captured in a book called An Epidemic of Absence by Moises Velasquez Manoff. Why do we have allergies? Why have they become such a big problem? And if we extend beyond allergies, why allergy and autoimmune disease? And there are fascinating stories around the world, like in Sardinia, where traditionally there were swamps that bred mosquitoes that transmitted malaria. And Sardinia historically had one of the highest rates of malaria around the world. And when everybody was getting malaria, they had some genetic defenses against it, and nobody got allergies or autoimmune disease. They drained the swamps around the middle of the 20th century. The mosquitoes can't breed there anymore. Malaria went away. And the Sardinians went on to develop the highest rate of multiple sclerosis of any population in the world. So an epidemic of absence will tell you that story. What we know about how changes in the environment affect the immune system, how very often it's related to the microbiome. It's really, really fascinating. I think it's one of the pivotal domains in all of medicine. I think your question, though, was more granular about food allergies, for example, what about gluten and so forth. And I would say that basically reverts to this issue of adhering to the theme, but allowing for variations on the theme. If you can't eat dairy because you're lactose intolerant or have an allergy, you need to avoid dairy. It may not mean that everybody does. If you can't eat gluten because you have gluten enteropathy or celiac disease or are sensitive to gluten, it means you need to eat gluten-free grains, of which there are more and more available to us, grains like quinoa and there are gluten-free oats. You really have to avoid wheat and barley, but among most of the other grains you have options. But if you're sensitive, you need to avoid it. Some people can't eat seafood, some people can't eat nuts. So again, the big question is, why are there so many allergies in the first place? Well, I think we're learning more about how that relates to changes in the environment affecting the microbiome. And again, an epidemic of absence is a fascinating read. In terms of dealing with it, I think very often lifestyle interventions can be effective. Adjustments in diet, adjustments in exposure. But you're right, there's no question that if you reach adulthood and have established allergies, you have to treat that. And by the way, nothing that I say about the power of lifestyle as medicine precludes the use of medicine as medicine. I'm an internist. I've treated people with pharmacotherapy my entire career. In fact, I'll tell you a brief anecdote. It has nothing to do with allergy, but it's indirectly relevant. I was due to give a talk at a Harvard conference in June. Lifestyle medicine conference. I was the marquee guy. The whole conference was sort of, my name in lights, that whole bit. And just a couple days before I was supposed to go up to Boston, I got really sick, and then got so sick I wound up in the hospital. And what I ultimately wound up being diagnosed with was anaplasmosis, which is a tick-borne disease, compounded by viral meningitis. I mean, I was really sick. So here I was supposed to give basically this talk about the power of lifestyle medicine. I was in a hospital bed with an IV drip. So I gave the talk via Skype from my hospital bed. And what I told them was, lifestyle is great medicine, but you know what? Sometimes medicine is great medicine too. Yes?
For a wonderful talk. It was awesome.
Thanks.
And as a nurse and deal in oncology and chronic care, everything you say is wonderful. The problem is that when you're sitting in front of a patient who has limited amount of funds, the easiest thing for them to purchase is the garbage, okay? They have mouths to feed, they have all of this to do, and they're thinking, okay, well, I can go buy the fruits and vegetables, which now if you look at corner bodegas and stuff, they are starting to get some of those things instead of just ramen noodles and pork rinds.
Right.
But people can't afford to eat healthy. I go to the grocery store, it costs me $100 just to buy one bag of really good food. I've got a gluten allergy, but I buy a lot of plants, and it costs money. How do we make it more affordable for those people? You can educate them, but if they can't afford it, that's a problem. The other thing, when we talk about exercise, schools, when I was a kid, we had the President's Program. You got a nice patch for participating in all of these things. And again, they're removing things like gym from, you have to pay extra to have gym in school today. How do we deal with those sorts of things as we're talking with patients, counseling patients? We know the education, but they can't afford it. So how do we cross that barrier? Okay,
so there's a lot there, and the easy answer first is that you're absolutely right, and it's why I emphasize the need to change culture, right? If you change your culture, so that the food supply is better, then everybody can access and afford better food. And if you change your culture so that physical activity is a routine part of everybody's day, well, then it's a routine part of everybody's day, and you don't have to work so hard, and you don't have to pay extra, and those kinds of things. So depending on the level of intervention, the burden may shift more or less to the individual, the client of yours or the patient of yours, the patient of mine, the family, the child, the parent. And frankly, I think many of the best defenses of the human bodies we're talking about do reside with the body politic. And so high-level change makes the defaults the health-promoting defaults. So that's the easy answer. It's a vague answer. You kind of knew that already, and you say, okay, well, that's lovely, but it doesn't really help. So I think I can be a bit more helpful. First, on the issue of the cost of food. There's a lot of urban legend in the mix, there really is. And the fact that we think more nutritious food costs more is compounded by an inability to cook, and poor people can learn how to cook, just like everybody else. What do I mean? Beans and lentils, stunningly inexpensive, extremely nutritious, replace meat in several meals. You can feed your family for pennies, vastly more economical than any fast food meal, stunningly more nutritious. But people don't know what to do with them. Well, we ought to fix that. So we need educational programs not about you should eat better foods, but simple recipes that use the highest quality nutrition at the lowest possible cost. And frankly, many of the world's healthiest diets are made up mostly of ingredients that are not all that costly. So one item is they're very nutritious, inexpensive foods. People just don't know what to do with them. But that's a different problem. Then it's not an economic problem. It is an educational problem. It's a skill-building problem. We can address that. We could maybe use churches to teach adults how to cook. We could maybe talk about reintroducing home ec to teach kids how to cook. We could maybe engage with local healthcare systems. We're working with our hospital to try and do a monthly dinner for the community where the culinary staff makes a great meal, inexpensive ingredients, and everybody who attends and has dinner gets a laminated recipe card. Try this at home, folks. Well, we could take advantage of resources throughout our communities to empower people with simple cooking skills that rely on the least expensive, most nutritious building blocks. That's one. Two, I had heard innumerable times over the span of my career that more nutritious food costs more. And I kept asking for data, and pretty much nobody has it. What everybody points to, yeah, yes and no. Your shopping receipt, but we all know the produce aisle is expensive. But if you compare, a better bread to a worse bread, is the better bread reliably more expensive? If you buy better pasta sauce, better salad dressing, better nut butters, and that sort of thing. The middle aisles of the store. Let's leave the produce aisle out for a second. I'll come back to it. Well, we never saw any data, so we did a study. And forgive me, for the sake of time, I didn't talk about allergies, I didn't cite this study, and I didn't talk about the project I'm about to mention. Sake of time and choices. Anyway, we published a paper in Public Health Nutrition. So if you go on Medline, type in my name, and just Katz DL cost food, you'll pull it right up. We sent a volunteer shopping in middle of America supermarkets and gave her criteria to buy more and less nutritious foods and asked for about half a dozen of each in all of the center aisles of the store. And we didn't say anything about price. We just said we want more and less nutritious, and we validated the spread in nutritional quality using the Anki algorithm. And all of this is in the paper. And what we were really interested in was comparing price. And it was a wash. It was a wash because very often people looking for better nutrition will choose this very fancy multi-grain bread in which almost nothing is a whole grain, and they'll completely overlook a very humble whole wheat bread with a short list of ingredients that is a whole grain, but isn't waving flags in your face to say, buy me. Health-conscious people will buy low-fat peanut butter thinking they're trading up, and instead they're getting something that swapped out some healthy oil for copious additions of sugar and salt. It's much less nutritious, but you're paying more for it. We found innumerable examples where the more nutritious product was the same price or less expensive, and yes, there were times when it was more expensive, but if you went from soup to nuts, it was a wash. It was absolutely a wash. So again, the problem isn't just the price of food. That's a little bit of the problem. Big part of the problem is food label literacy. Not for you, but for your patients. If they knew how to choose the better item that didn't cost more, they could trade up substantially. Remember the image I showed of Sally Galvin and the 150-pound weight loss? Well, that wasn't because she was spending so much more time in the produce aisle. It's because she was buying better salad dressing, better pasta sauce, better bread, better cereal. All that stuff adds up. It really does. And that isn't necessarily more expensive. In terms of the produce aisle, as I'm sure you know, there's a particular effort now in the SNAP program to reduce the cost of produce, to increase the purchasing power of SNAP vouchers specifically for produce. As you say, bodegas are more likely to stock locally grown produce now. There are more and more farmers markets. But I think the solution can be bigger. The other movement, of course, is people doing their own gardening. So we've got edible schoolyards and urban gardening. And a lot of the good stuff to eat is stuff that we can grow in a little patch of ground or even in an aeroponics unit on a rooftop. And more of that is happening. And as everybody becomes their own farmer to some extent, prices will stop being an issue. But again, I should digress for a second. We also published a paper some years ago on barriers and facilitators to fruits and vegetable intake in a multi-ethnic population. And we found that price was just one of many barriers there. People don't know what to do with vegetables. They also don't like the fact that fruits and vegetables are unreliable. I mean, you buy a peach, it may taste like the most luscious thing ever, it may taste like plastic. You buy Doritos, damn it, they always taste like Doritos. So, people don't like to spend their hard-earned money on a peach and find out it's the one that tastes like plastic. They're pissed off when that happens. They really are. So there are other issues there. In any event, we are working on a project we call Fingertips. Financial incentives, nutritional guidance, and educational and retail settings, taking it to the people in the street. Ta-da! It's an excellent acronym. The idea is, so we have, we developed this Anki algorithm or the Nuval system. It scored over 110,000 foods, 1 to 100. The higher the number, the more nutritious the food, validated against health outcomes, including all-cause mortality. What if we attach purchasing power directly to that? So what we want to do in particular with needy populations in the SNAP program is say, for any food in the food supply, if it's in the bottom quartile of scores for that category, your voucher for $1 is worth $1. But if it's in the next quartile up, it's worth $1.25. The next $1.50. If you buy foods in the top quartile for that category, the best bread, the best chips, your dollar's worth $2, and therefore the most nutritious food is always the least expensive for you, including in the produce aisle, but not limited to the produce aisle. And then, and here's maybe where you guys get in the game, I thought, why limit that to the public sector? How about a private sector enterprise where big insurance companies who are paying the cost of chronic disease care say, hey, we will adopt supermarket chains that overlap where we've got a big footprint. We will pay to put nutrition guidance systems in the supermarket, and we will put an incentive into the loyalty card program so that same approach works for everybody, because here's the deal. The shopper saves money choosing better food to get to better health, they win. The supermarket gets to advertise the fact that they guide people at a glance to better nutrition and provide financial rewards for doing so. They grow market share, they win. And if the costs of programs like this for the insurance industry are less than the cost of bariatric surgery and coronary bypass at the prevailing rates, then your profit margins widen and you win. Win, win, win. So, sister, I believe it's a problem, but it's a fixable problem.
I like the last solution more than anything.
Thank you. We're working on that one. Thank you very much.
One thing I'm wondering about too, you're talking about food, and there's always this debate between organic and non-organic. And that's, to me, I think, is it fair to say that's a bit of a wash as well?
Yeah, it's a bit of a distraction. Organic is better for the planet, no question. So if you can find and afford organic, do. It's a better thing. Proving that organic is better for human health is damn near impossible. I mean, consider the study you'd need to really prove it. You would need a long-term prospective study where people eat the same foods, but in one case they're entirely organic and in one case they're entirely conventional. So they're alike in every way except for the fact that one maybe has residual pesticide residues that the other doesn't. Extremely hard to control. I mean, you'd have to analyze that to show the differences. So, I would apply the precautionary principle, which says if you don't know that it's safe, assume it may not be. I don't think it's a good idea for us to be consuming pesticide and herbicide residues. I don't think it's a good idea for us to be getting antibiotics and the metabolites of added hormones in our food. So, organic matters most with certain produce, dairy, eggs, poultry, meat. If you can get organic in those categories, do. Better for the planet, kinder and gentler for the animals involved, and probably better for human health in ways that are really hard to measure. But If you can't, and this is where we tend to go wrong, I call this risk distortion. I have, as a preventive medicine specialist who's taken care of patients for 25 years, I have a fantasy about the typical American. And it's a guy who downs a 6-pack of beer, smokes a pack of cigarettes, jumps on his motorcycle, rides 100 miles an hour without a helmet to get to a rally about dioxin, because that stuff will kill you, right? I mean, that's kind of how we roll, right? I mean, we overlook, you know, the massive risk. And Dariush Mozaffarian, the Dean of Nutrition at Tufts, said something very similar recently, talking about the debate about the different saturated fatty acids and what do you tell your patients? And he said, I tell them to stop smoking, right? So we routinely overlook the big risk and then, you know, and worry about the very small risk. So, you know, there really is an enormous opportunity, I think, to correct the potential ills of harmful exposures by shifting to a diet of wholesome foods and sensible combinations. You're taking out things we know are toxic, you're taking out sugar, you're taking out salt, you're taking out food chemicals, which are almost certainly not good for us, you're taking out trans fat and saturated fat. And then if in addition you buy organic when you can, you are reducing beyond the current nominal levels exposures to those potentially harmful substances. Much of that is being addressed at the level of regulation. I met with friends in the dairy industry, and their milk batches, organic or otherwise, are routinely tested for any residue of hormone or antibiotic, and if it's present, they can't sell it. Right, so some of this stuff is really being addressed at the regulatory level. But my basic advice is organic's a good thing. We're supporting smaller farms, local farms. Support it when you can. And if you want a more detailed answer, you know, when does it matter most with produce? February 2006, Consumer Reports published a paper, and I think you can access the PDF online, called When It Pays to Buy Organic. And it was the research up to that time showing which are the foods that show the greatest difference in any potential pesticide or herbicide residue. And by the way, some of the times we think organic might be a good idea, it makes no difference at all. It makes no difference whatsoever with fish or seafood. It's lovely to think that it would be better. The reality is water flows freely into other water. They can't keep a water source pristine. And since we've contaminated the planet in general, those contaminants are going to be in fish and seafood, and we're just stuck with it. Anybody who wants absolutely pure fish and seafood, you have to visit another planet, I'm afraid. All right, so organic's a good thing. But when people get hung up on organic and refuse to eat broccoli because it's conventionally grown, they're missing the forest for the trees. All of the studies that show massive benefit from diets of mostly plants did not control for those diets being organic or conventional. They emphasized wholesome foods and sensible combinations. Organic is icing on the cake. Yes, sir.
Report recently that the average weight of the youth of Minnesota last year went down. I don't know if that's a trend or not, but are you seeing other glimmers of hope?
Yeah, but I think Minnesota is noteworthy. I think there was a statewide initiative here, and I think you actually are setting an example others should follow. So nationally, it looks like levels of childhood obesity have plateaued recently, and that's very encouraging. Unfortunately, they've plateaued in a very high place, and staying on that high plateau does not portend well for the future, but it's certainly better than a steady rise. But in a few places, the curve has bent down, and I was here about 6 months ago meeting with public health officials, talking about the fact that there really has been a concerted effort here to take a lot of what we know and convert it into what we do. So no, the news is not nearly as good in most other places around the country. Most places it's steady at best, and in many of the places that are most challenged, southern states in particular, rates of childhood obesity are starting to rise. The other bad news from a global perspective is that nations all around the world are catching up with us. So, you know, it may be that we've plateaued because we can't go much higher, and all the vulnerable people have already been affected, but we're doing a pretty good job of exporting our lifestyle, so we see very brisk rises around the world. So globally, it remains a huge problem. But yes, those states that are doing the most, and I'm seeing more and more papers that are looking at things like, if your state has the most policies, for example, related to preventing an infiltration of a school area with junk food establishments, fast food establishments, does that influence the rate of adolescent obesity in your state? And the answer appears to be yes. These logical associations tend to hold. So I think Minnesota's doing a lot of things right and is a good example for many other states. Not the only good example, but we've got a long way to go. But yes, there is hope. And actually, it's an important thing to note that when we get it right, you know, it's kind of the when you build it, will they come question. And the answer is yes. When we do things right, it does start to turn things around. We have the evidence that it's possible to fix this. Going once, going twice, up, one more. In under the wire.
I thought that I was busy and didn't have time to exercise until I heard about everything that you're doing. Inventing acronyms and stuff like that must take a lot
Yeah, it's
of
very time consuming.
Um,
Actually, I do that while working out.
There you go, multitasking. I was just going to ask for a little sneak preview from your book and ask if you had any tips about finding time for physical activity during a busy day.
Okay, and then we're out of time. Thanks for the question. And so very brief answers. First, I forgot to mention one of the sandbags is a program for all of you during the workday. It's called ABE for Fitness, Activity Burst Everywhere. It's a library of videos online that you can watch to guide you through activity bursts throughout the day. So those days that are crazy, you can't fit it in, there are ways to fit it in anyway. You know, instead of a coffee break, you take a 3, 4, 5-minute activity break, refresh your brain, you're more productive. Basically, the definitive answer here is I long ago decided that I was too busy not to exercise. I need it for equanimity, I need it for enthusiasm, I need it for energy and health. So if I let it go, overall I accomplish less, not more. And on any given day, it may feel like I should skip it because I'm too busy, but over time, I actually lose more than I gain. So, you know, if you talk to my wife, what she'll tell you is I'm a bit of a fanatic. You know, I just decided I'm not going to find time for exercise. I will make time for exercise. It's a priority every day. I'll fit it in. I was in the gym here this morning at about 5:30 because that's when I had to get there to get here on time. When I was younger, I was even more fanatic and I had to get up at 4. I don't do that anymore. So I do miss a few days a year, international travel. I mean, you know, some days it just doesn't work. Most days, if I can work out before I go to the office, I do. If it's a day where I've got a really early appointment, I will work out afterwards. I also try to combine my standard workout, which I do every day I can, with just being active in general. I spend a lot of time at airports. I get a great amount of exercise at airports. You know, I don't take the trains and I don't take the escalators. I take the stairs. I always walk. Minneapolis Airport's a great place to exercise. It's really big, long walk there. Add stairs into that, you know, there's 20 or 30 minutes of activity that, you know, you had to do to get where you were going. I get up and move around. I've got dogs. I take them for a walk whenever I can. So a lot of it's recreation, just being active, and then a commitment to making the time. Now, it works for me. You know, if I talk to my wife about, you know, what about when you're a parent with young kids? And I think there are phases in life when it's virtually impossible. For me, it was when I was a medical resident. I had no control over my life. My schedule was totally under the control of others, and I was working 110 hours a week. I didn't do it during that phase of life. So then it was really more of a philosophy that when I can get back to this, I will. Because it really is what we do most of the time over most of our lifespan that adds up to make the biggest difference. And then in the book, there are lots of different strategies about if you like this, if you like that, do it this way, do it that way. But almost any way to make your day active. You know, putting motion in your day is a good way to get there from here. But I made it a commitment. It's sort of a religion for me. Folks, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.